Hello everybody and welcome to another exciting episode of Radiorama, where I show you how to work on primarily radios and tube-powered electronics from the 1920s through about the 1960s. And today we have a Crosley model D-25MN, and on Crosley they would have the last two letters indicate the color. This is maroon. This was donated to our establishment about a month or two ago. The guy originally had $5 on it, which is a pretty good deal, and he just gave it to us. So thank you if you're watching. It's got some cosmetic issues here. It looks like it might have been dropped. And we've got some cracks in the bakelite that could probably be pushed out and re-glued. It's not the end of the world. It's got a Telecron clock movement in it. And the Telecron rotor is still free because it's spinning. Let's go ahead and give it a little bit of a quick fire test here. Got it turned on. I have my hands at the ready to turn it off in case what typically happens, which is the electrolytic capacitors are shot. And
that figure on V that's blocking the left lane
still works actually. I've worked on a number of these. They come with a phono input in the back, which is kind of nice. That'll save me a little time when I do decide to add the audio input. Looks like the cord's in real nice shape. These came with an auxiliary outlet on the side. The idea being that if you put it in the kitchen, you could hook up the coffee percolating machine, and when the alarm went off, it would activate the outlet. So you could have either coffee, an alarm, or coffee and music, or all three going off at the same time. These are sometimes a little bit of a challenge in that the plating here, which is, I think that the gold part is actually a spray, like a yellow spray they put over chrome, and usually that just comes off when you clean it. It's not the end of the world. I've been putting this one off because the cabinet's kind of grubby and gross. But we're off of work for a week, so I got to keep myself occupied. In fact, I've got a whole schmoodle of sets over there that I'm going to work on during the next week. And of course, we need to build up our supply of sets for a future date. All right, I'll stop yapping. Let's take it apart and see what's going on under the hood. All right, so I took the back off, and here's the innards. And first thing I'm going to do before I get too far away or carried away is these style of antennas. They're stamped into the cardboard, and they tend to come loose, and they're real fragile. This is all coming loose. So what I do is I get my hot glue gun, really heat it up, and I just like re-secure everything down. So when I take the chassis out, I don't damage any of this stuff here. The other thing I do is we've got these color-coded wires. And so I'll just mark like which one goes where. So red, yellow, and black, or whatever that is. It looks like a black wire. Maybe it's brown, but I'll figure it out. To disconnect the clock on these guys, you take this bolt out. This swings up, and there's little colored dots that indicate which color-coded wire unplugs from their respective jacks. Because the clock stays in when you pull the chassis. I'm going to have to pull the clock anyway because I need to repair the case. And I know these guys probably have a little bit of radium or tritium on those dial hands, but you see it's really intact. Plus I believe the plastic cover stays on top of the clock, so it's still secured. So anyway, I am curious if this has been ever worked on. Looks like we've got the original dial cord. There's definitely some not original tubes in here. And it's actually, you can see this is kind of a post-war set. We've got a mixture of different tube types. We have miniatures, and then we have one octal in there. It's probably like the 12SQ7 or something like that. Let's see. Well, I'll find out when I pull the case. But anyway, I'm waiting for my hot glue gun to warm up. And we'll re-secure this down, and then we'll pull the chassis out entirely along with the clockwork mechanism, and I'll see if I can repair the case. Alright, everything's been disassembled, including all of the chrome and the trim and everything. And when I have a radio that has a lot of little parts like that, I'll get a cottage cheese container or some other container and put all the stuff in there so I don't lose it. I'll even put the lid on it because I have a tendency to knock shit off my shelf. Here's the clock. Came out all in one piece. Here's the two little medallions on the side. I'll clean those suckers up later, but my number one priority is to fix this bakelite. What I'm hoping is that I can push this back out, put a little glue in there, and kind of tighten up these cracks so it's not as noticeable. Alright, so I was able to push the joints back together from the bakelite from behind. And what I did here is I put a bunch of clear epoxy behind those cracks in the case, so that'll kind of stabilize everything. I'm going to let it sit here. We've been having a little bit of rain. This is the first time we've had rain in about a year, so I'm pretty happy about that. They put drought restriction on us, and you're not allowed to water your lawn more than once a week, but luckily we don't really have much of anything that grows in the lawn. So now we're going to go back to the chassis as my wife puts vegetables away in the refrigerator. It's almost Christmas time around here. Anyway, I took a look underneath and it looks like that this is mostly factory original except for one part. Someone has replaced this 1/10 of a microfarad capacitor, but the electrolytics, the paper caps, everything, they're all original. And according to the electrolytic, we have three values here: 100 microfarad, 30 microfarads, 10 microfarads. And here's our little symbols on the sides, indicates which value is which. Square, triangle, unmarked. Square being 100, triangle being 30, 10 being unmarked. And you can find those stamps on the bottom of these things. Either they're embossed or they're etched into the phenolic material. Can't really see it. This is not my favorite chassis to work on. It's awkward and weird. The one thing I will say that I'm pleased about, every other one of these Crosley models that I get in, the speaker rubs. Not this one. This one's in good shape, so that'll save me a lot of pain and anguish. But I'm going to go ahead and replace these three electrolytics, and we're going to replace this one can with three individual electrolytics. And as I've pointed out repeatedly on a lot of these sets, this is a floating ground chassis. There's a phenolic wafer that the electrolytic is attached to, and it's not attached to chassis ground. This cap underneath, the yellow one, that one's going directly to chassis. That's the grounding cap, and it's probably a value too big for today's standards, probably either 0.1 or 0.047. We need to take that down to a 0.01 microfarad, and we've got a ground coming off that that tube. Once we recap it, we'll give it a safety check to make sure that there's not too much current getting to the chassis. And if I measure too much, it's probably that guy right here. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of leakage coming through the tube shield. Well, this is hard to film, but the first part of the restoration process is done. I replaced all three electrolytics, and sometimes with a crammed case like this, you just have to be a little creative. I'm just going to go ahead and shotgun replace the rest of the caps here. We have approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I think there's one lurking under here. There's 7 capacitors. And if you've never done one of these, it's not that difficult. Usually the values of the caps are written on their sides. Like this one is a 0.01 microfarad rated at 400 volts. They're all going to be marked. And I just use 630 volt rated caps for everything. The one that's really important is this guy, 0.08. That's a huge value for going to ground. We're going to replace that with a safety cap, which I left in the car, so I'll need to get those. But just go ahead and replace the rest of these guys, and then we'll give it a test fire, make sure we're still all happy and working. Alright, so we got the whole thing kind of recapped here. Again, this is a real tight chassis, but I got everything installed. And I got the clock radio reattached, so let me try to gingerly put this down. And let's go ahead and give it a test fire. Just make sure the clock is running. It is. And we've got any tube filaments here. We do.
A former Minnesota police officer has been convicted of manslaughter in the death of a related for the last few days.
Kim Potter found for crab stuffed mushrooms. WCCO's ABC News contributor,
United States Marine.
Taken within 5 days of...
Seems like we're pretty happy here. Boy, does it stink like cigarettes. I'd say like 75% of the radios I get in stink like cigarettes when you warm them up because the nicotine that's been building up on the tubes warms up and it stinks. Kind of reminds me of my grandmother. She smoked like a chimney. Anyway, speaking of cleaning, I am going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. Then I'm going to take it over to my safety rig over here and make sure that it's got the proper amount of current that's within limits, safety limits. And then we'll probably move on to the case, which, as we saw, was kind of sad and dull looking. Alright, so the next part of this process is polishing the case. As we see, it's really dull. Should be shiny. I'm going to save myself the cramping up my hands. I'm going to use my orbital buffer and some liquid wax. Just going to go over this thing like crazy to see if I can bring back the shine. I haven't seen one this dull in a long time. Welcome to day number 2 of working on the Crosley. Did a little more polishing up on the case last night, and I also cleaned all the metalwork. I'm about to go over the metalwork with some polish, but what I did is I soaked it in a little solution of CLR and hot water overnight. And that removed all the corrosion, but I'm going to have to buff out the metal to make it shiny again. And what I'm going to do now is add the audio input feature. I'm going to go in through the set's existing phonograph hookup, which is right here. There's not a lot of room in this chassis, so I'm going to mount the isolation transformer, which is what we run the audio through. I'm going to mount it right here. There's nowhere to put it up top because the clock cover goes all the way back here, and I don't want to put it right next to this output tube or rectifier. Let's see, what is it? 35W4 rectifier. That's going to get real hot. So there's not. That's literally the only place it'll go, and it's a good place because it's right next to the volume pot, which is what you kind of want to do. So I'll install that, and in this case, it already has a resistor and a cap before the pot, which will prevent the incoming audio from interfering with the set's automatic gain control system or feature. God, this thing is unbelievably smelly. It smells like cigarettes, so I'm hoping that after it's been run for a little while, it won't stink as bad. Kind of reminds me of my grandmother. She used to smoke like a chimney when I was a kid. The whole house smelled like it. But anyway, let's add this audio input feature. Do a test to make sure it still works. And then we'll start doing some reassembly of all the little doohickey parts and stuff for the trim on the cabinet. This is going to be hard to film because it's so crammed in there, but I did install the audio input feature. And what I did is I drilled a hole through the chassis, and then I used a file to smooth over the edges, and then I tied a knot in the audio cord and put some glue around it so the user can't chafe it or yank it out of the set. The right and left channels are running through a set of resistors, and then we have the primary end of the isolation transformer going to either side of the pot. I let my Bluetooth run out of juice last night, so I can't demonstrate it right now, but it does work. I tested it, and then it just zonked out of power. Just to make sure nothing's touching in here, I am going to apply a little glue over the top of all those components. And then I think it'll be time to do a final test. And then we'll go over and, well, actually before I put it back together, I need to go over and buff out all the metal work for the trim, and then we'll reassemble the cabinet, and then we'll put the chassis back in the set, and hopefully it'll be done. All right, well, it's all back together again. It's a real shame there's cracks in the front, but, you know, I didn't want this thing to go in the trash. These things are too stylish, and I just like working on them. Got our tuning indicator all put back on, and we got the little Bluetooth running through the side here. Got to turn it off before Google figures out I'm playing something. Anyway, it turned out pretty good. We got our little switch in the back so we can turn it off between radio and Bluetooth. Boy, is it not happy. Let me turn this around.
Well, you've read your Bibles long enough to find out enough the ancient.
A combination must be held in tension. And C.S. Lewis did a beautiful job of painting that picture. So let's talk about Santa.
Shit, gotta redo this. All right, it's all back together again. And it seems to be working quite well. Again, it's a real shame we got some cracks in the front, but they are stabilized. Hopefully it won't be that noticeable. Whoever gets it, I'm definitely going to show it to them and be like, hey, it's not perfect, but at least it works. I've got the Bluetooth going through it.
Mambo, mambo, che te merita, ricca, 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 tu urla, tu fai, mambo, mambo.
I really need to scan what I decide to play before I film that, but oh well, you get the idea. Anyway, I might do a little more buffing on this, but otherwise it seems to be working okay. I'm going to let it play here for a few hours to make sure that anything that's heat related, if it's going to fail, then it'll fail before it goes back out into the wild blue yonder and becomes a problem. Anyway, this is a special Christmas Eve edition of Radiorama. I've got a few other sets to work on, but right now I'm going to go up and work on my gutters, which is more important. And hope you all are staying safe and happy where you are. And I've said this before on the show, but I think it's worth saying again. Guys, if you're not vaccinated yet, go ahead and do it. This variant right now is absolutely surging. And even though there's some indications it might not be as serious, as in it seems like it wants to go to the upper respiratory tract versus the lungs, just do it for your fellow man. All of my family members, all of my friends, all of my radio friends, everyone at the museum, all my coworkers, we all got ours, and we're boosted, and we're totally fine. It should never have been turned into a political thing, but somehow it did. It's just medicine, and it's made by people that are a lot smarter than you and me and most people on the planet combined. So again, make yourself an appointment. Go ahead and get your jabs. You'll be fine. And if anything, do it for me for Christmas. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you had a good time. Hope you learned a thing or two. And until the next time radio comes across my bench, I'll see you next time.